Welcome to the Leading Visionaries podcast, featuring stellar conversations with emerging and established leading visionaries. Thanks for joining us today as we celebrate and spotlight the leading visionaries who are thinking differently, seeing new possibilities, have the courage to dream big, take inspired action, and create conscious change all around the world. Now, here's your host, Anjel B. Hartwell.
Welcome to another episode of the Leading Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the ingenious, insightful, innovative, and inspired leading visionaries of our time and provide our listeners with world-class examples of the kind of courage, clarity, and confidence it takes to bring visions into reality. This is your host, Anjel B. Hartwell, and today we welcome our special guest, Jeff Bartsch. Jeff is a visionary storyteller, communication strategist, and founder at Story Greenlight. With over 20 years of experience in the entertainment industry and online business, Jeff has helped shape content for clients including ABC, NBC, Universal, Disney, Apple, and many others. Jeff's commentary has been featured in major publications including Time Magazine, USA Today, and the Associated Press. Through Story Greenlight, Jeff and his team empower business experts and leaders to tell their stories, serve more clients, and expand their impact in the world. He believes that the power of story is within reach of everyone and that human connection is everything. Well, I am so excited to be connected with you today, Jeff. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anjel. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, this should be great. So I want to start, Jeff, because you're a storyteller, by asking you if when you were little, were you the kid that lined up all of his soldiers or all of his bears or all of his fuzzy animals and started telling stories? Or is storytelling something that came later?
You know, I will say I was the bookworm. I was Jeff the bookworm. I far preferred books to people for most of my early years. And I was all about doing things by the book. And in fact, I actually started classical piano training when I was 4 years old. And for people familiar with classical piano, classical music, I loved Bach and Mozart because they were super technical and I could play the notes on the page and everyone says that I was amazing. And I got lots and lots of reps in with doing that on Sunday mornings in church. And I did that for many years. And there was a day that one of the older church musicians came up to me and said, Jeff, it's all well and good to play the notes on the page, but when you get older, you need to learn to play from your soul. Now, I was 10 or 11 years old at this point, and everyone was telling me that I was doing amazing. And I thought that was the stupidest comment I'd ever heard. So I just ignored her, as kids tend to do, until years later, people started reacting in a different way. And instead of saying, Jeff, you're such an amazing piano player. You're so good at this. They would say, thank you for playing that song. That was the message that I needed to hear today. And even every once in a while, you'd get people saying, Jeff, the way you played today brought me into an encounter with God. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those things where I eventually, it took a long while, but I eventually figured out this is way bigger than me. And there is something that when you take a message, when you take even music or a message and you take it from the ordinary and you raise it up to that other next level, there is a next level beyond just playing the notes on the page. Even though we're all doing the best that we can, there is always that next level. And so in answer to your question, it's not just something that I've been developing over 20 years in Hollywood. This is something I've literally been learning and teaching and empowering others to do literally for 40 years of my life. I started when I was 4. I'm 44 years now. It is incredibly powerful when you take the narrative forces of communication and you use them in service for what your audience is seeking and the change that they want to see in your lives. And they are skills. These are all skills that are within the reach of absolutely anyone.
Well, and the interesting thing about this story that you've just told, Jeff, a couple pieces that I want our listeners to hear. One is she planted a seed in you. Mm-hmm. And that seed took shape and flowered because you could have stayed just reading the music off the page, but something must have shifted within you subconsciously, unconsciously, superconsciously to allow you to blossom in your expression in such a way that you were able to touch people. Because from my perspective, if you stay technical, sooner or later, it becomes so dry and so mechanical that people can feel it. They can feel it. So what I'm hearing there is that you were able to blossom that seed. The other thing that I really want our listeners to hear is, as a leader, it's important. The communication piece is the most important thing that you can dial in as a leader. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit about your own journey into leadership and also your work with other leaders, helping them, maybe you're being the woman, like the woman who was for you, helping them to transform out of technical prowess and into relational prowess.
Sure. Well, I would say there's a distinction to be made between, a lot of people will say you have the technical elements, and it's important to not let those slide, because in any element, in anything we take on, there will always be the fundamentals. There will always be the building blocks. And so then I remember I was in a panel discussion one day. I was in the audience for a panel, and one of the people in the panel was a man who was a re-recording mixer at Warner Brothers Studios. And he spends his day mixing movie soundtracks on this massive, absolutely massive mixing board that stretches from one side of the theater to the other. And he says the more impressive the tools that you use, the more important it is that you know them like the back of your hand so that you can make them disappear and focus on what really matters. So in terms of how I've been helping people do that for themselves, it actually started about 5 years into my career shaping television content. And I saw that my work in that context kind of had me pegged at an income ceiling. And I wanted to discover additional income sources, additional streams of income. So I said, hey, I'll help teach people what I've learned here in Hollywood. And the way it started actually was helping young assistant editors and young editors who wanted to do what I was doing, being a full-time broadcast television editor, and help them learn the creative side. Because so many times people would say, okay, just tell me what buttons to push. But it's far more important to know why you push the buttons. It's the higher level of all this. So that's how I started doing that within my adult life. Though, even as I'm saying this, I mean, it went all the way back to junior high when people said, hey, Jeff, you're great at playing piano. Can you teach my kids some piano lessons? And that's where it started there too. Mm-hmm. So the teaching has always been part of it. But then also just putting in the reps, getting in the practice and getting those fundamentals down so they do function like the back of your hand. You do know them like the back of your hand. So then you can say, okay, what are we really talking about? That's the place where when you start applying this to communication internally with yourself or with your team or one-to-many in marketing or one-to-one in sales conversations, that's when the truly powerful things happen, when we think of the bigger picture strategic storytelling elements.
Beautiful. So let's talk about how you help specific leaders do both the reps, like get the reps in, but also turn on that connection part of themselves so that when they do communicate, that they are able to make the impact that they really want to make.
To make that clear, I want to make sure that people find a very important distinction here. Because when people talk about the idea of story, it's very easy to think of it as this kind of boring pedestrian. It's not a big deal. I mean, I tell stories about what I did last weekend or whatever. We do that all the time. And the fact of the matter is we're all living a story of our own. Every one of us, we're living a story every moment that we're alive. So there is that. There's attempting that familiarity can breed contempt. But what that is most people think of storytelling as the tactical version of it, the boots on the ground, telling the anecdote. the water cooler conversation. The true power comes from the big picture, from the strategic storytelling. And you can engage in this without ever engaging in tactical storytelling at all. This is why you can have a conversation. You can have a sales conversation. You can have a marketing conversation. You can have a crucial one-on-one conversation without ever telling a so-called story. But the power comes from the definition of what I always say a story is. A story is where a character wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. If you're familiar with Donald Miller's work, Building a Story Brand, that's the first two sections of that come from an early writing of his. And I tweaked the last part and added the third part myself. It's character, desires, obstacles, and transformation. The whole goal of any story is transformation. So to your question, how do I work with a business leader or a visionary to say, okay, let's take your story and let's truly connect with someone? The first thing we're talking about is, what are we wanting to accomplish here? And who is on the receiving end of this communication? What is their storyline? Who are they? What do they want? What's getting in their way? What's keeping them from getting what they want? And how can we come alongside them and help them get what they want? That's the fundamental question. The deeper level question ends up being, okay, so this is what we're talking about on the surface, but what is the deeper level of what this really is about? If you're having a mergers and acquisition kind of a conversation, if you have a company coming in and buying up another division of something else, they can come in and say, hey, this is the story of our new company. And the people in the company that's being acquired, they very well might end up taking that in kind of a cold way. And it's not because the new brand message is bad. It's because they care about something deeper. They're wondering, do I still have a job? Am I secure?
Yeah.
It's that kind of a thing. So those are the kind of conversations that need to take place in any kind of communication to say, okay, who is the audience? What do they care about? And what are the deeper psychological elements truly driving them?
Beautiful. Well, listeners, I hope you heard that. You need to be thinking about, what are the wants? What are the obstacles? What's the transformation? Also for yourself. And, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I'm going to let you know where you can find Jeff so that he might be able to help you with that. Right now, though, listeners, are you a leading visionary or in the role of leading other visionaries? Consider joining our community and sharing your feedback and takeaways from each episode. We invite you to join us and support this podcast by making a donation at leadingvisionariespodcast.com. Are you interested in finding out more about how you can receive support for getting your vision out of the air and onto the ground? You can apply to qualify for a complimentary consultation with me or a member of my team by clicking the Connect with Anjel button on the website. Be sure to share this show in your own spirals of influence with the people who you think might benefit from our content. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our listeners who are downloading and rating and reviewing. We're welcoming thousands and thousands of downloads from all over the world. I want to shout out this week to our listeners. We are now up to 16 countries. So let me shout out to the 4 new countries: Germany, Nigeria, South Africa, and the UK. We will be right back with Jeff Bartsch.
The Leading Visionaries podcast is brought to you by the Creative Age Consulting Group. Are you the one who thinks differently, who is called to create a significant conscious change in the world, who is seeing and dreaming of a better way for your industry, your community, humanity? Creative Age Consulting Group is hired to guide leading visionaries just like you who want to break through the static in order to clearly express and confidently enroll support for their vision in a way that makes it inevitable that it will come to pass. Your word is your wand, and as the leader, your ability to articulate and communicate your vision is essential to its materialization and monetization. Please enjoy with our compliments a free copy of the book, Be Heard by Millions and Live Your Destiny, which was a #1 new release in 3 categories to get you started. The book is yours by visiting gift.leadingvisionariespodcast.com.
And we are back with Jeff Bartsch. You can find out more about Jeff and all the ways that he helps leaders and visionaries to work with him and dial in the communication strategy. Before we even start telling the story, we have to have the strategy dialed in. If you were listening before the break, you can find him at storygreenlight.com/visionaries. We will have that for you in the show notes. So, Jeff, before we went to the break, we were talking about this arc, of the storyline, what the story is supposed to do. I want to take a minute now and talk about your own vision and your own becoming a visionary, because you've been in Hollywood, but then you ended up choosing to start your own thing. So I'd love to have you talk about how that precipitated. How did Story Greenlight come into reality? And what was the process for you of receiving the vision and then bringing the vision to life? And maybe what's the story that goes along with that? What's the story strategy of your own brand?
It's how long do we have? So it's interesting because I find in, looking backwards, connecting the dots in my own life, I find that I was interested in lots of different surface level manifestations of communication. It started with piano as a kid. It got into music production and recording in junior high, got into video production in high school when it was still actually really difficult to do, and not yet cell phones were still being invented at that point. So just as a point of reference, and going into college, getting into radio, going into film school, and then 20 years in Hollywood, broadcast television. I thought it was about the different things that I was doing. And I didn't realize that the true power lay underneath the things that were on the surface. So it's not just about talking in a mic, sitting at a piano, doing all this stuff. It's about elevating the communication in a way that is received by people. Now, as people will find, if you want to do that in a business context, it's not just enough to really know who you're talking to and what they want. There has to be things that work in terms of the business in order for it to be sustainable. You have to be able to provide value for people. And within the context of business, you have to actually be able to provide value to people who have a problem and they're willing to exchange finances in order to get that problem solved. And that's something that took me a while to figure out. So in terms of the vision of Story Greenlight, it took a lot of wandering and a lot of banging my head against the wall and a lot of figuring out what it should be and realizing what it should not be.
Yeah.
And what then happened was, the cool thing was, I started engaging in tweaking the story structure in my own life. And this is something that anyone can do for yourself. Because if you take that definition of a story as a character who wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result, if you change that first thing, that character, the identity of the character, literally everything downstream of that changes. So if I look at myself as I am Jeff, the piano player, well, Jeff, the piano player, has certain things that he wants to do. If I'm Jeff, the film student, if I'm Jeff, the television editor, if I'm Jeff, the creative coach for YouTube content creators, which was a path that I was pursuing for a while, you can see how when you change your identity, you end up changing what you do, which brings an entirely different set of obstacles that brings you along the way, to the point where when you say, hey, I am Jeff, I'm a storyteller and a communication strategist and a business collaborator, engaging in the identity of becoming the number one business storyteller on the face of the planet. Now that is a direction that I'm seeking. That's where I'm going. That's the kind of change that anyone can do just by changing how you see yourself as the character in your own life.
Oh, I love this, Jeff. And I will tell you, and for those who are listening, I've legally changed my name 5 times.
Okay.
And changed my identity as a result of that. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And I know how purposeful we can be when we are making a conscious choice, when we're making a conscious choice. And I think the main challenge is, people don't really realize they can make a conscious choice, right? And then number 2, sometimes making the conscious choice to change your identity has a lot of obstacles and challenges that come with that. And I definitely know that path. So the other piece of this, Jeff, that I really want to drop in here is I love your intent to be the number 1 storytelling consultant on the face of the planet. I will second that motion for you. Whenever 2 or more are gathered, that's when magic can happen. So the other thing I wanted to drop in here is I'd love to have you talk about how you actually help your clients to be able to have the courage to see that they have a choice and then make the change of their character so that they can receive the outcome that they're really looking to create.
I will say sometimes it doesn't get to that point. Sometimes clients come to me and they say, well, for instance, was working with some virtual CFOs, and they're working with a company who provides virtual fractional chief financial officer services. And so their goal was to say, hey, let's develop this presentation personalized with stories from these experts' lives and personalize it towards their industry niche. So that was the goal. That was the deliverable. And so I worked with them and we did some story discovery sessions, and we worked to craft these presentations, worked to develop their on-camera presence, their energy and their state that they bring to their presentation. And it's possible that it can just stay there. But the cool thing about this is the more you dig into your own story, the more you realize who you are and the value that you bring into the world. One of these men in this group that I was working with was diagnosed with cancer. And so he started on his treatment, and he sent me an email a little while later, and he said, Jeff, I got to tell you, working with you to learn about these stories has really helped me see that I have a lot left to offer to people in my industry. I'm going to kick this cancer in the butt, and we're going to blow the lid off these projects that we're working on. There's a lot more work to be done. And I'm just going, this is so cool, because it's, the point was the initial engagement was to, hey, let's put together this presentation personalized for you. And on top of that, he was able to realize I have so much more to offer to the world. And it's so cool. And it's true for all of us. Every single one of us.
And what I hear in that story is that he changed his identity from somebody who is getting ready to die to somebody who's like, oh, damn, I'm not done yet. Right?
Pretty much.
And when you change your identity to somebody who's, damn, I'm not done yet, then you are going to kick cancer in the butt. Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, I love working with clients, and I can tell, I can feel it in you that you also love working with clients. And it's always a surprise for me, the transformation, those of us who do this kind of work, who work with people who are looking for transformation, you never know what the actual end result is going to be, because when you tweak the character or you tweak the obstacle, the transformation is going to have side bennies, right?
100%.
Yeah. So in the last couple of minutes that we have, if there was something that you could speak to our audience about that would inspire them to buy into the idea that it's important for them to be conscious in the creation of their own story, and by extension, in the creation of their vision and their brand, what would you want to say in the last couple minutes here?
I would say that people can get really caught up in the workings of story and lots of moving plot points. And it's true, if you go long form stuff, it can get really complicated. Not even Hollywood gets it right all the time. That's a whole other separate discussion. But in terms of when we engage in story for ourselves, the thing that I'd most encourage listeners to consider is that the whole point of this is that last part when you talk about the definition of a story being a character who wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. Because no matter who we are, no matter what we're doing, all of us have change that we're seeking to bring to the world. That is what story is. That is what we all do when we put these narrative forces of story into play. And as we become students of these narrative forces and start saying, okay, this is how this works. This is who I am. This is who I'm communicating to. This is what they want. This is what the change that they want. This is how I can help them get that change. That is when those changes take place. And it is an incredibly powerful thing. It's an incredible honor for me to be involved with. And it is an honor for all of us to be involved with that.
Beautiful. Well, you're a master wordsmither and spellcaster with your storytelling, I am quite sure. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation today, Jeff. You're a powerful presence, and I am excited for our listeners to hear this. Listeners, we do love feedback. Please let us know what you thought of today's episode by joining our community, sharing your takeaways, asking questions, or submitting guest suggestions. You can weave your visionary thread into our fabric by opting in on our website at leadingvisionariespodcast.com or by interacting with us on social. Look for the handle at Leading Visionaries Podcast on all the major platforms. Thanks so much for tuning in. Keep your eyes, ears, and hearts open. And remember, you are here to create conscious change.
Thanks for tuning in, downloading, and listening. Be sure to rate and review Leading Visionaries on Apple Podcasts and share with other people you know who can benefit from today's episode. Leading Visionaries is the premier podcast series for informing, activating, and inspiring the leading visionaries who are called to create conscious change and know that now is the best time to welcome wealth and cultivate a web of collaborative support to bring their vision to life. We invite your feedback and guest suggestions and invite you to subscribe to our mailing list to be notified of new episodes at leadingvisionariespodcast.com.